Mr. McQuire, and welcome to this presentation on homeostasis and reproduction. We will be looking at many topic areas over the coming lessons, but this is the first presentation where we will be looking at the central nervous system. At other points we will then be looking at receptors as part of the central nervous system and looking at the body's coordination with hormones. Homeostasis, as part of the title, is a word that means keeping the same or human same, and we will be looking at how the body achieves that. So before we start, let's make sure first of all that we have somewhere as quiet as possible to work, so that we can focus on the learning for today. And you will need a pen and paper. Got a table to draw as well during the lesson, so a ruler would be a help as well. Okay, so here's our starter. If you look at all three of the images that are in front of you, they all have something in common. There may be more than one thing they have in common, but there's one thing in particular to do with this topic that I'm interested in. I'd like to give you 60 seconds to have a good think about each of those images and how you would describe them, and see if you can come up with some idea of what it is that I am asking you to think of. Right, so let's see if your thinking is compared with my thinking. Now I want to start off with this pupil reflex here. If I shine a light that's bright into your eye, then the pupil will get smaller. If it gets darker in the room, then your pupil will get larger. This is a sneezing reflex, and rather disgustingly you can see a large cloud of droplets from this particular sneeze, which is just awful. And this here is a kicking reflex, a knee reflex, that would be used by a doctor to test your reflexes nervous system. So what do they all have in common? Well, they are all reflexes, and they are all automatic responses to situations that allow us to exist without thinking about every action. It's very exciting to work out exactly how the body does so many things without any thought process at all, and we're going to see something about how the body does that in this topic. So our learning outcomes for today. First of all, our challenge is we're going to label the key parts of the nervous system, and for our aspire we are going to describe in a written form a nervous response. So let me describe what you see in front of you. We have a lorry driver that's trying very hard to stop. What I'd like to know is, how did the driver first know that they had to stop? And secondly, how does the driver then respond to knowing that they should stop? So what are the actions that the driver goes through to do that? Very particular questions, and I'd like you to try very hard to answer those two questions. I'm going to give you 60 seconds just to think about the response that you could give to those two questions. Okay, so we're now going to develop the idea of the story that's in front of you. I'm going to call it a scenario, so I'll say it now. Let's call it a scenario or story. So here's our first thought process. First of all, our brains, which are shown on this particular diagram in front of us here, are part of the central nervous system. That's the brain and the spinal cord together. They have various senses that are plugged in. I'm going to use that expression at this point. And in this case, the driver has an eye that senses and sees the car. That provides a sensory input to the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. And what happens then is that information is processed, and I'm hoping that you thought that I should put my foot on the brake. That is called a motor output, which goes to a muscle in the leg, which results in the driver then contracting their leg, which pushes on a pedal, and as we saw on the diagram, hopelessly not stopping their vehicle before they ran into the parked car. That bit is irrelevant. The important part is that we begin to get an idea that this response to a particular situation has various parts. And we're going to look at that in more detail now. So on your piece of paper, we're now going to start constructing some notes using information from the previous two slides and the slide that we are going to move on to shortly. Now, going through the scenario or picture, we can see the following things occur. So let's now see it in words rather than diagrams like the previous slide. The first thing is that the eyes sense the danger. There's then a signal sent to the brain and spinal cord, which is otherwise known as the CNS or central nervous system. Then a signal is sent to the motor nerves, which then move the muscles in the foot, causing the lorry to brake. Now what I'd like you to do is to use the title that I have underlined on the page here and to put it in the middle of the top of your page. So the main title is Central Nervous System, and today specifically we are looking at a nervous response. So that's your title, all of this up here. And then I would like you to spend a few minutes now just putting a table down that is in front of you. I've entitled this column on the table What Happens, and over here I have put summary name, and at the moment that's hidden from you. So what I would like you to do is to spend the next maybe 5 minutes, I think. I'd like you to put that information down under the title Central Nervous System, a nervous response, and just to list that inside a table. Each of those could be a bullet point, or you could put a line in between. So you've got 5 minutes to do that. Off you go. through. Just a reminder, we've put the title of central nervous system and a subtitle of a nervous response. Then we've set up a table and we are in the process of putting down the information that's in front of you. The eye sense the danger, etc. down the page. It's got two columns. The second column on the right hand side that's blue is at the moment quite a narrow column. It's not got large words to put in it. So you've still got now about 2 minutes to finish off. If you've already completed the work, I'd like to spend the last minute just thinking about the senses that we have. Let's have a look at the summary now. First of all, the eyes sense the danger. Well, the eyes are an example of a receptor. The signal is sent to the brain and spinal cord, and the brain and spinal cord, as part of the central nervous system, CNS, are the coordinator. They're receiving something and they are then causing something to happen. So they're in the middle of that. The motor nerves receives a signal which is connected to a muscle. The muscle is an effector, and this sentence here has the effect of the muscle written in it, but it also has the response written in it as well, which is to move the foot. So these two here really could share the same two words. Now I would like you now to add this information to the last column of your notes. Shouldn't take you much more than a minute to do that. So just add those words to that column on your table, please. Okay, well, you're finishing off then. So on your page in front of you, you should have a title, Central Nervous System, with a subtitle, a nervous response. You've got a table with two columns, and you've put the information down completely now that is on the two columns that are in front of you. And now we're going to learn to apply that information, and while we learn to apply it, we will also then do our challenge, which is to label the key parts of the nervous system, and we'll get more and more familiar with those as we keep moving. So let's continue to develop our picture of the nervous system. Then first of all, this should be quite straightforward for you. We have on the slide in front of us a list of stimuli, which are things that our body is capable of being sensitive to. And you should be able to tell me already, because much of it is key stage 2 work, what is the receptor that we use to be able to detect it. So let's start off with the smell of tasty food. What do you think we use for that? Obviously that would be the nose. The sound of your favorite music. I hope you're thinking ears. The taste of your favorite food. I guess that's the tongue. Very important sense, especially for food that is off. Very important to know that it's off, along with our sense of smell. Now this may be slightly harder for you. I wonder if you know the feel of a cuddly toy. What are the senses for that? Now that's going to be a touch receptor that's found in the skin. And an easy one to finish, the image of your mobile phone. So if you look at your mobile phone, obviously the receptor that you are using is your eye. Let's just recap those: nose, ears, tongue, skin, and eye. Now I want to be very clear that I could reverse those questions and say to you, what does the nose do, what does the ear do, and what does the tongue do? So it's very important that you can do those questions either way around, and if you feel like practicing that, the eye sees. What is the function of the eye? It's a receptor for light and it sees. That kind of idea will just develop your learning. I don't want you to write those down because I think they're really basic, but if you disagree with me on that, then you may need a list of the receptors and what they do, but stop the presentation to do that. Now in front of you we have a picture of a neuron or nerve cell. Now it's very important that we learn that these cells are very long and connect up parts of our nervous system, and we're going to develop that idea. We're going to learn this particular shape now because this is a specialized cell in the body, and we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at how it's specialized, but it's important that you know that it has the parts of cells that you will have looked at as part of your science course already, such as a nucleus that you can see in the top of the cell here. There is cytoplasm and all the other words that you may be familiar with. Now we're going to do this with a bit of fun. What we're going to do is have 30 seconds to look at the picture and the labels and the shape, and then I'm going to take the image down and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to draw what you can. Now you may try and draw and then I'll take the image down, but then if you haven't looked hard enough it may disappear. So what I'd like you to do is take your first 30 seconds starting now. Trying to remember that image, and then I'm going to take it down. Now this is a neuron, so that can be your title, and you need to start trying to draw on your page below your notes now. 30 seconds before I bring the image back. Okay, the image is coming back now. See what you can remember. Get those labels and get the arrows to the right parts that are on it. These finger-like projections at the end called dendrites. Look at the cell body. 10 seconds. Get your pen ready. Okay, draw. Okay, get what you can out of your mind. Just the general shape and structure. It's not looking for perfection. You're learning as you go. Right, here it comes again. What an amazing cell shape that is. Okay, up it goes again. See if you can get those labels on. Okay, and finishing off. Right, if you need to finish the diagram, then it is there, and you can pause the presentation and cheat a little, maybe, to allow you to do that. Okay, so we're working on your recall skill there. Skills there. Now, this particular chef in a kitchen has just picked up a pan. He didn't know that the pan was hot, and a reflex is about to occur. Your response to picking up something that would be incredibly hot would be for your muscles to release that pan as quickly as possible. After that point, there are then a series of learnt responses, such as shaking your hands around and dipping them, running them under a cold tap for a long period of time. Those are not reflex actions. It's what happens before you start thinking, because they are automatic. And we're now going to spend some time developing those ideas about what happens during a nervous response, which is the Aspire for this particular lesson. Let's develop some ideas first, though. Here is some geography of the nervous system. We need to be clear about the three types of neuron, and I'm not going to go into great detail with this because this is developed more in Key Stage 4, but it's a good idea to start developing these ideas. So the first thing I want to point out to you is that these are color-coded. The temperature receptor, pain receptor in the skin of the hand is connected via this sensory neuron. So the sense is connected to a sensory neuron. That connects to the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. So this is running along the arm and then straight across the body to the spinal cord, where it goes in to the center of the spinal cord, the grey matter. And inside there we have another neuron called the relay neuron. So it passes through these gateways here. Quite a short leg, a relay neuron. Just visualize doing PE for a second and passing the baton. This electrical impulse is passed across this gap and then passed across the gap again. Notice it hasn't gone to the brain. And here is the motor neuron here, which is blue, which is connected to something called an effector, and an effector is something that has an effect, and in this case it's a muscle which causes the hand to move. It could have been a gland which would release a hormone such as adrenaline, which certainly may well be released with a raise in heart rate, etc. And remember, I'm trying to make you jump during this presentation at some point, so you actually can nod at me and say, I understand what you're saying. Now, I want to point out that there's a little junction here as well, and this is the point where the information about what has occurred is being sent to the brain, but that is not an automatic response that will come from the brain. This is short-circuited completely. And even while you're listening to this, you continue to blink. There are many actions that occur in your body that do not require conscious thought to achieve. You can do them consciously. So we are learning how to describe the journey that the electrical impulse takes. And we're learning to do that very simply. So what I would like you to do, please, is to write down this list for me. This is the absolute minimum that I would expect you to know, and it would guide you in terms of structuring a question that would be asked of you. And when the particular thing that occurs to make you jump in this presentation, I want you to recognize the various bits that are in front of you. The stimulus is the thing that a receptor responds to. Could be a bright light in the eye. The coordinator is the brain and spinal cord. The effector is a muscle or gland, and the response depends on what the stimulus was in the first place. It will be a very definite action that you would need to identify. So I'd like you to write that list down, please, and I'm going to give you just a minute to do that. So be nice and quick with that, please. Okay, you should have a nice list: stimulus, receptor, coordinator, effector, and response there. So let's move on now. Now, I want to add some detail underneath that list, because that list is a list that will answer any question for you. You have to identify those parts. This is more specific. So we have down at the bottom of the page here the candle. We have above that the hand, and then we have the various receptors that are here. Notice this is color coded in purple, so we have a purple sentence, a green sentence, a blue sentence. Now I want to run through these for you, but I don't want you at this stage in your science career to be writing all of this down. Okay, we can do that when we've finished listening. The important part is the first thing we notice is we have a sense organ, and that is connected to a sensory relay. So point number one says sense organ. Heat receptor senses the flame. The signal, electrical impulse in our keywords, is passed down the sensory neuron. Then the green inside the spinal cord down here. The signal is passed to the relay neuron. Visualize the baton being passed again, please. It'll help your learning. And then we've got the electrical impulse being passed to the motor neuron, which carries the signal from the spinal cord to the muscle in the arm. Think effector. And then number 4, the arm muscle or effector contracts. Here's the arm muscle, and the person moves their hand away. Now you've got a little list at the moment which involves stimulus, receptor, coordinator, effector, and response. But now what we've done is we've got a more detailed answer. Now I want to give you a couple of minutes now just to get this information down that we have here. Okay, it's very important that it's done accurately so we have a good description, but there are some key words in there that I would like you to take from the list at the bottom, and whenever you put one of those keywords down, I would like you to underline it, please. Away you go. Okay, I hope that was loud enough for you. That was a stimulus that you just had, but think about your body's response for a second and what the sensory organ was that caused it to occur. Now, if you've not finished your notes for those, then just pause and complete those notes. Oh! Sorry, I couldn't resist that particular moment. Now, I want to illustrate using the sound that you just heard again, because we've got in front of us another scenario that we're going to use. First of all, the sound was a stimulus. The receptor, because it was a noise, was your ear. Okay, then the electrical impulse from our keywords travels down a sensory neuron into a relay neuron in the spinal cord, and finally a motor neuron, which results in a muscle, which is an effector, which causes you to jump. So the effector in this case would be a muscle. Now, that was a story that came from a noise, but here in front of you is a scenario which involves this pin. Now, the scale is pretty horrendous here. I really hope this drawing pin and this person never come in contact with each other. But what I would like you to do now is to use the learning that I have just been through with you, and I would like you to look at the scenario where this poor person stands on this pin, and I'd like you to model using the bullet points that are here exactly which the parts are, just as I have done with the bell. So what is the stimulus in this diagram, and what will the receptor be? Okay, if you struggle with any of the parts, just leave them blank and I will go through them in a second with you. Okay, but I'd like you to try and do some application using the shape of the bullet points that are in front of you. You've got a minute and a half to fill in as much of that information in your book as you can. Okay, so let's record some detail then and just run through this. Please remember that the basics are the letters that we wrote down earlier. So the stimulus is the pin, receptor nerve cell in the foot, and a sensory neuron sends a signal to the spinal cord. A relay neuron passes the signal. Keep visualizing that PE race to the motor neuron, and the effector is a thigh muscle, then moves to the foot. Now the diagram at this point can be very helpful if we need it to be, because we can see on there that we have got the sensory neuron in red, we've got a very short relay neuron in green, and then the motor neuron is marked in blue. Just keep taking note of those as we move through each of these different scenarios that we have used. That will help you, of course, to label parts of the nervous system as well if you were given a diagram to draw. Okay, so let's have a quick plenary. looking at the diagrams. Let's see if we can answer some questions as we move through this. See what we've learnt. Okay, looking first, what's the scientific name for the nerve cell that's in front of us? Try not to cheat by looking at the bottom. See if you can remember what the cell's called. And of course, it's a neuron. I hope you've got that right. Let's try a second one. This is quite hard to picture properly on here, but what is the stimulus in this scenario? What is it that causes the driver to start braking? And we can start to identify that with the discussions we've had today. The van driver seeing the parked car is the stimulus for the action. Our third question, a big clue with the diagram. In the reflex response, what part of the central nervous system do the messages travel to? Now we've seen this repeatedly. Now what's that diagram on the right hand side? It's a slice through what? And the answer of course is the spinal cord. Okay, just to finish with our fourth question, what are the missing words that go with these? So we've got an S neuron, an R neuron, and finally we have our M neuron. So what do those three letters stand for in front of the word neuron? S, R and M. Now hopefully you've got sensory neuron, relay neuron inside the spinal cord, mental picture of race, and motor neuron, which of course you may have heard of in connection with a disease, motor neurons disease. So this is the last slide. Let's just have a quick look at our challenge for today. We should be able to now label key parts of the nervous system, hopefully labeling some of the neurons as well. Aspire to describe a nervous response in terms of the key letters that are part of that. So it's been a pleasure being with you today, and